My stepdaughter threw her dad's photo at me, said I was just an accident. I took the rent money, left the picture, and walked out. That's when she finally learned what loss feels like. Subscribe to the channel and share your stories in the comments. And now, let's get started. When I married Laura, I thought I was walking into light after too many years of noise. She came with a daughter, Haley, 14 then. Skinny, sharp-eyed, half-grown and half-gone already, as if she were bracing herself for disappointment. I told myself I could handle that. I'd been disappointed too. I knew what it meant to live inside the wreckage of other people's promises. Dean, her father, was the kind of man who talked with his hands but never used them to build anything. He'd breeze in once every few months, the smell of motor oil and stale beer clinging to him, carrying some plastic-wrapped trinket like it excused the months of silence before it. He'd pat Haley on the shoulder, call her kiddo, promise a beach trip, a new phone, a car one day. Then he'd vanish again, always vanishing. I was the one who stayed. I paid the rent, the insurance, the phone bills. I cooked, fixed, mowed, carried. I was the one who showed up at parent-teacher nights when Dean couldn't be bothered. I didn't want to replace him. I just wanted her to know what permanence looked like. The first months were good. We ate together every night. Haley laughed when I burned the pancakes or tripped over the dog. Sometimes she'd sit beside me on the porch after dinner, her knees pulled to her chest, asking questions that seemed to come from somewhere deep. Do you think people change? Were you scared when your parents divorced? I told her the truth, that people change only when they lose something they can't get back, and that fear is what keeps most of us from leaving the fire, even when it burns. She listened. She even smiled. Those were quiet evenings, gentle ones. I thought maybe that was what a family sounded like. But calm never lasts. It starts to slip away the moment you believe you deserve it. The first crack came one Sunday morning. We were assembling a new desk for her room. Laura was upstairs folding laundry, humming to herself. Haley handed me screws one by one, reading the instructions aloud, and somewhere between step 4 and step 5, her phone buzzed. She saw the name Dad and froze. Then she walked out without a word. When she came back, her eyes were bright and strange, the way people look when they've been promised something beautiful. She said Dean was taking her to the amusement park next weekend. Her voice trembled with excitement. I smiled, told her to have fun, but something in me tightened. I knew he wouldn't show. Men like Dean always make plans just to feel human again. When the weekend came and went, she didn't mention it and I didn't ask. Silence is easier than saying, I told you so. After that, the house grew quieter. She started keeping her door closed, her earbuds in. At dinner, she'd scroll through her phone, half listening. Laura said it was hormones, said teenagers build walls and then tear them down again. I wanted to believe her, but I could feel the shift, like the gravity in the room had changed and I was the thing being pulled away. One evening, in early fall, we drove to her school recital. Rain on the windshield, wipers fighting to keep up. I'd worked a 12-hour shift but didn't tell her. I just wanted to see her play. She sat beside me, looking out the window, headphones in, humming something I couldn't hear. Halfway there she asked, without looking at me, "Do you think Dad's coming tonight?" I told her I didn't know. She nodded, quiet. He didn't come, of course. I clapped the loudest when she finished her piece, but she never looked toward me, only at the empty seat in the back row where he should have been. That empty seat sat between us for weeks after. Sometimes I'd find her in the kitchen late at night, whispering into her phone, smiling the way she used to smile at me. When I'd walk in for a glass of water, she'd lower her voice, turn away, end the call. Once, I caught her saying, "No, he doesn't care. Trust me." Then she hung up. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the words died in my throat. Maybe I was afraid of the answer. Laura noticed too, but she handled it with that soft detachment she called peace. She'd say, "She's a teenager, David. You're too sensitive." Or, "She needs her father. You can't blame her for missing him." And I didn't. Not at first. But Laura's tone, light, dismissive, cut deeper than Haley's silence ever could. Because every time she excused it, she told me, without saying it, that my effort didn't count. That love, in this house, still needed blood to be real. I kept doing what I'd always done. Paying, fixing, showing up. Love isn't just emotion. It's repetition. So I repeated everything. The morning drives, the packed lunches, the goodnight knocks on her closed door. But the more I did, the less it meant. She started comparing us aloud. Dean's fun stories. His adventures. His big plans. Things he never delivered. But she recited them like scripture. And Laura would just smile and say, "He means well." I wanted to ask her when meaning well became a defense for abandonment. Then came the moment I stopped pretending we were fine. I came home early one afternoon, tools still in my hands, the smell of sawdust clinging to me. Through the half-open door of the living room, I heard laughter. Haley's voice, high and bright, the way it used to sound. Dean was on speakerphone, bragging about buying her a car after graduation. She said, "You're the best, Dad," then glanced toward me and lowered her voice. When I stepped inside, she went silent. The air turned heavy, like I'd walked into a conversation about a ghost who'd suddenly appeared in the doorway. Dean kept talking, oblivious, promising more. I turned away, pretending to check the mail, pretending it didn't feel like I'd been erased. That night, Laura found me sitting in the dark on the porch. She said I was making too much of it, that I should be happy Dean was stepping up. I wanted to ask her where he'd been for 14 years. Instead, I asked if she ever thought about what that kind of silence does to a child, to keep forgiving the man who keeps leaving and punishing the one who stays. She sighed, said I was overreacting, that I needed to relax. Her words hit harder than any insult, because in that moment, I saw it clearly. She didn't want peace. She wanted avoidance dressed up as peace. From then on, I spoke less. The house echoed with the sound of a man trying not to disturb his own life. When Haley passed me in the hallway, she'd mumble a greeting that felt like obligation. I'd nod, half smile, move aside. The space between us became something living, something with weight. And still, I paid the bills. Still, I left money on the counter for her lunches. Still, I fixed the broken drawer in her room after she slammed it too hard. Because I didn't know how to stop being useful, even when usefulness had turned into invisibility. The last warm day of that year, we had a barbecue in the yard. Laura invited neighbors, friends from her office. Dean was supposed to stop by. Another promise. Haley spent the afternoon waiting, glancing down the street every few minutes. He never came. When night fell, she went inside without eating. I found her later, sitting on her bed, staring at her phone like she could summon him with sheer will. I stood in the doorway, wanting to say something, anything, but all that came out was, "You okay?" She didn't look up. She just said, "You wouldn't understand." And maybe she was right, because how do you compete with absence? How do you fight a man who exists mostly in memory and myth? That night, Laura whispered in bed, "She's just hurting. Don't take it personally." But it was personal. It always had been. Every sigh, every shrug, every withheld smile. It all traced back to one truth she wouldn't admit. She missed the man who left, and she forgave him for it, because forgiveness was easier than facing her own choices. And Haley had learned that forgiveness too, directed not toward me, but away from me. The following week, Dean reappeared. He stood in our doorway like a storm we'd all forgotten to board up for. Laura's face lit up in that small, guilty way that told me she still felt something when she saw him. He came for coffee, for conversation, for performance. He said the right things: college, responsibility, making up for lost time. Haley hung on every word, and I, standing a few feet away, invisible in my own kitchen, felt the ground shifting beneath everything I'd built. When he left, Laura said, "Maybe it's good for her. She needs her father." I nodded, but inside, I felt the slow crack of something final, because I understood now. No matter how many bills I paid, how many nights I stayed, I was still the placeholder between disappearances. The man who kept the lights on but never lit the room. I'll never forget that dinner. Not because of what was said, but because of how quiet it became afterward. The kind of silence that doesn't leave when you stand up, or when you close the door. It clings. It lingers. It follows you into sleep. It was early spring, the air outside damp and restless. Laura had insisted on cooking something special: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, a bottle of wine I'd been saving. We were supposed to celebrate Haley's college acceptance. I remember how she sat across from me, her hair pulled back, her phone beside her plate. She barely looked up. Dean had called earlier that day, promising to help out with tuition. I'd heard it through the thin walls, that same recycled promise, but I didn't say a word. I'd already paid the deposit. I had the receipts, the printed forms, everything neatly folded in a manila folder by my chair. Because I always had proof. That's what men like me do. We keep records, just in case we ever need to remind the world that we were the ones who stayed. Haley pushed her food around the plate. Laura tried to keep the mood alive, asking about dorm assignments, roommates, orientation dates. Every answer came in one-syllable drops. Then, somewhere between the clinking of forks and the hum of the refrigerator, Haley looked up. Her eyes were dry, but there was something wild behind them. A kind of trembling courage that only comes when a decision's already been made. She stood, reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. I recognized it instantly, her and Dean taken years ago at some fair. She must have carried it all this time. The corners were bent, the colors faded. She threw it across the table. It slid toward me, stopping beside my plate. Then she said it, her voice sharp enough to slice through every year I'd given her. "That's what a real man looks like. You're just a mistake." Laura froze. I didn't move. The words didn't hit me all at once. They entered slowly, like poison spreading through a vein. I looked down at that photo. Dean with his arm around a little girl, both smiling like the world had never lied to them. For a moment, I almost pitied them. They didn't know then what he'd become, what I'd have to clean up after. I wanted to say something, but nothing came. My throat closed around every word I'd ever swallowed for her sake. There's a moment in every man's life when he realizes the effort no longer matters. That night was mine. The laughter, the bills, the years of patience. None of it had made a dent. I was a name on a lease, a wallet with a pulse. Nothing more. Laura whispered her name, but Haley didn't look back. She sat down again, calm, satisfied, like she'd finally said what she'd been rehearsing for months. I stared at the photo, tracing the outline of that man's grin. I could almost hear him laughing somewhere, drunk on the idea that he'd still won. That no matter what he broke, I'd always be the one sweeping up after him. I left the photo on the table, didn't touch it, didn't fold it, just stood up, steady, quiet. Laura reached out, her hand trembling, but I stepped past her. The air in that room felt heavier than the walls could hold. I grabbed my house keys from the counter, the folder from beside my chair. The one with the rent receipts, the tuition payments, the medical bills. The evidence of a life built on silent giving. I didn't look back when I said, "I'll take care of myself from now on." My voice sounded strange, flat, almost gentle. I walked out before the silence could answer. Outside, the night was cold. The streetlights stretched my shadow long across the driveway. I remember hearing the sound of Laura's voice through the window, low and panicked, like she'd suddenly realized what had just slipped out of her hands. I didn't stop walking. At the corner, I paused, pulled out my phone. I moved the rent payment, the one I'd already scheduled for next month, back into my own account. Then I called the landlord. My voice was calm, almost businesslike. I told him the lease would stay in Laura's name only from now on. He hesitated, asked if everything was all right. I said, "It's overdue, that's all." When I hung up, I felt nothing. Not anger, not relief, just the dull ache of a man finally done pretending. I'd spent years carrying a family that had already decided I didn't belong in it. I rented a small room the next day close to work. It was barely furnished. A bed, a desk, one chair. The kind of place meant for transition, not living. I unpacked slowly, each object stripped of its context. No family photos, no reminders, just the essentials: receipts, work clothes, silence. Laura called that night. I didn't answer. Her messages were long, uneven, half apology, half defense. She didn't mean it, David. She's just confused. You know how she is. I listened to one of them once, just once, and then deleted the rest. I couldn't stand the sound of her trying to balance love with excuses. That first week alone was strange. I woke at dawn, went to work, came home to quiet. For the first time in years, I ate dinner without waiting for anyone. The air was still. I told myself this was freedom, that I'd finally stepped out of a house that had long since stopped being a home. But freedom can feel a lot like exile when you've built your entire identity on being needed. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if Haley missed me at all. Then I'd remember her face that night. The way she looked at me when she said those words. There was no hesitation, no doubt. Only conviction. She'd meant it. And maybe that was the part that hurt most. That I had taught her dependability, and she'd used it to build a world where I didn't exist. Laura came by once, a week later. She stood in the doorway of that little room, eyes red, hands shaking. She said she couldn't sleep, that Haley was quiet now, withdrawn, as if the victory had soured. I wanted to tell her I'd predicted this, that love built on rebellion always collapses when the rebellion is gone. But I stayed silent. She whispered, "You don't have to leave us like this." I said, "You left first." She cried quietly, the way people cry when they know the truth and can't bear to hear it aloud. After she left, I sat on the bed and stared at the single photograph I'd brought with me. Not of them, but of a lake I used to visit alone before we met. I'd kept it as a reminder of who I was before I tried to become someone else's solution. The man in that picture wasn't smiling, but he looked at peace. I envied him. Nights are the hardest, not because of loneliness, but because silence doesn't argue back. It just sits there, heavy, patient, reminding you that sometimes walking away isn't punishment. It's self-defense. I think about that dinner often. The way the knife reflected the ceiling light when she threw the photo. The smell of the roasted chicken cooling untouched. Laura's face, frozen between disbelief and guilt. And Haley, sitting there afterward, calm, certain, proud of the wreckage she'd made. They'll tell themselves a story, I'm sure, that I overreacted, that I abandoned them, that I was cold. Maybe they're right. Maybe leaving without a word was cruel. But cruelty is sometimes the only language left when silence has already said everything. I paid for everything in that house, the roof, the meals, the future. I gave them stability when all they wanted was a story. And when that story turned against me, I did the only thing a man can do when he's spent too long being invisible. I disappeared on purpose. Because you can't stay where your effort turns into a target. You can't keep paying to be unwanted. And sometimes walking away isn't losing. It's the only way left to survive. The week after I left, the world felt thinner, quieter. The mornings had no voices, no clatter of plates, no sound of Haley's door slamming before school. Just the steady hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette and the echo of my own footsteps. For the first time in years, no one depended on me. It should have felt like relief, but it didn't. It felt like being erased from a photograph while the image still burned in the frame. Laura called every other day. Her messages came with that same trembling urgency, the kind that tries to sound calm but cracks halfway through. The words blurred together. She didn't mean it. She's scared. We can fix this. I didn't reply. I'd spent too many years fixing things alone. Too many nights patching over the same holes with the same tired promises. This time, the silence belonged to me. Then came the practical fallout, the kind that exposes where love used to live. The lease transfer went through without a hitch. The utilities switched to her name. My credit card statements stopped showing their expenses. The detachment became mathematical. Each deleted transaction, each canceled payment was another thread cut clean. Numbers have a way of telling the truth people refuse to speak. A week later, the first cracks reached them. It started with a text from Laura. "Can we talk?" It's about Haley's apartment. I didn't answer. The next day, another. "Dean hasn't sent the money yet. She can't cover the first month's rent." I stared at the screen, the words flickering in the dim light of my rented room, and felt a strange calm settle in. The inevitable had arrived. 2 days later, she called. I picked up, maybe out of habit, maybe out of curiosity. Her voice was small. "She thought he'd come through," she said. "He promised. But he's not answering." I could hear the soft hitch of her breath, the weight of disappointment returning like an old debt. "She's scared," Laura whispered. "She doesn't know what to do." For a moment I almost broke. The image of Haley packing boxes, her face twisted between pride and panic, pressed against me like a bruise. But then I remembered that dinner table, that photograph sliding across the wood, her voice steady as she called me a mistake. Some words live forever once they're spoken. "She'll figure it out," I said. My tone was even almost gentle. "She's grown now." Laura went quiet. Then, so softly I almost missed it, she said, "You've changed." "No," I answered. "I just stopped pretending." That ended the call. After that, the silence deepened. Days passed without messages. Work became mechanical, a refuge built on repetition. I started staying late, fixing things that didn't need fixing. The office became my shelter, a place where effort still had meaning. At home, I learned to live inside the stillness. Dinner was a single plate, washed and dried immediately after. The radio filled the hours between dusk and sleep. Then, one evening, I came home to find a letter slid under my door. No return address, but I recognized Laura's handwriting. The envelope was wrinkled, the paper inside smudged like it had been gripped too tightly. I opened it slowly. The first line read, "She called you right, you know. You were the one who stayed." I read it twice before folding it back up. No signature, no plea, just that one admission written in ink that had bled a little at the edges. I placed it in the drawer beside my bed, next to the old receipts I still hadn't thrown away. A month went by before I saw Laura again. She showed up at my workplace one afternoon, waiting by my truck. She looked smaller somehow, like the world had been whittling her down piece by piece. "She's trying," she said before I could speak. "Haley got a job at the bookstore. She's paying what she can. She knows she hurt you." "She said that?" I asked. Laura nodded, but her eyes drifted away. "Not directly, but I can tell." I almost laughed. Not directly. That had always been their language. Apologies disguised as gestures, guilt hidden behind silence. I told her I was glad Haley was working, that she'd learn more from a paycheck than she ever learned from my money. Laura looked at me like she wanted to say more, but didn't. She just whispered, "You're colder than I remember." Maybe I was, but coldness was the only thing that kept me from burning. After she left, I sat in the truck a long time. I thought about all the years I'd spent teaching Haley how to stand on her own. Budgeting, responsibility, caution, and how much I'd shielded her from the cost of those lessons. Now she was learning what I'd been trying to protect her from. That comfort is fragile, and someone always pays for it. Months passed. The rhythm of my life became clean, if not whole. No calls, no visits, just the occasional email from Laura, updates, small attempts at connection. "She's doing better. She's passing her classes. She misses you." I didn't reply to any of them. I'd become fluent in silence. It was a language that required no forgiveness. One evening, in late autumn, I stopped by a grocery store near campus after work. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and steady. In one of the aisles I saw her, Haley. She was in a bookstore uniform, her hair tied up, exhaustion etched beneath her eyes. She didn't see me at first. She was restocking shelves, humming faintly. For a moment, I watched her, that strange mix of pride and ache knotting in my chest. She looked older, sharper, more like someone who'd begun to understand the price of things. When she finally noticed me, her face froze. The air between us thickened with all the words we hadn't said. She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe just to breathe, but I shook my head. Not in anger, in acknowledgement. She nodded once, slowly. Then she turned back to her work. That was our truce, silent and brief, but real. For the first time, I saw in her something I hadn't before. Consequence. Not the cruel kind, but the honest one. I drove home through the fading light, the city washed in shades of amber and blue. Somewhere between the traffic and the hum of the engine, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The hurt was still there. It would always be there, but it had lost its sharpness. It had become part of me like scar tissue. You stop noticing it until someone touches the spot. Laura visited again near winter. She brought coffee, stood awkwardly in my kitchen, looking at the bare walls. "You really live like this?" she asked. "I live within what's mine," I said. She smiled sadly. "She wants to see you. She won't say it, but I know." I poured her coffee, black, no sugar. "She can come when she's ready. She's afraid you'll turn her away." I met her eyes. Maybe she should be. Some doors shouldn't reopen too easily. She left soon after. I watched her car disappear down the street, the tail lights vanishing into the early dark. The room smelled faintly of coffee long after she was gone. That night, I lay in bed and listened to the city beyond the thin walls. Sirens, laughter, the pulse of distant life. I thought about how easily people say family as if it's a permanent word, as if it can't be taken back or broken. But families aren't built on shared houses or shared names. They're built on respect. And once that's gone, everything else is scaffolding. When the silence finally settled again, I felt it not as emptiness, but as something earned. I had carried them for years. I had given them comfort, stability, a life without fear. Now they were learning what it meant to stand without my shadow. Maybe that was my last act of fatherhood, to leave so they could finally grow. In the morning, I found myself staring at the letter again, the one Laura had written. "You were the one who stayed." I slipped it into my wallet before heading to work. Not as a reminder of loss, but of endurance. Because sometimes distance isn't punishment. It's the only way love learns what it's worth. It happened almost a year later, on a Sunday morning that looked like any other. I was fixing a loose cabinet hinge when the knock came, soft, uncertain, like someone testing whether I still lived there. I wasn't expecting anyone. The landlord always texted first, and I'd long since stopped hearing from Laura. I wiped the dust from my hands, crossed the room, and opened the door. Haley stood there. She wasn't the girl I remembered. Her hair was shorter, her eyes quieter. There was something stripped down about her, as if life had sanded off whatever armor she used to wear. She held a small envelope in her hands, trembling slightly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hallway light caught the edges of her face, and for the first time, I noticed how much she looked like her mother when she was tired. "I didn't know if you'd still be here," she said. "I am," I answered. She nodded, biting her lip. "I just wanted to give you this." She held out the envelope. Inside, I could see the corner of a photograph, the one she'd thrown across the dinner table nearly a year ago. My stomach tightened. I didn't reach for it right away. Her eyes met mine. There was no arrogance this time, no defiance. Just a quiet, steady shame. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know who was really there for me." She didn't wait for me to respond. She placed the photo in my hand, turned, and walked down the hallway. No tears, no lingering. Just that simple motion, a departure that felt final but not cruel. I stood in the doorway long after she disappeared from sight. The hallway smelled faintly of rain. Somewhere, a door slammed, then silence. I closed mine slowly, leaned against it, and looked down at what she'd left behind. The photo was the same, her and Dean, frozen in a smile from another world. But now, scrawled across the back in uneven handwriting, were the words, "I'm sorry. I know who was really there for me." For a long time I couldn't move. My thumb traced the edge of the paper, rough and worn from the years it had spent in her wallet. I wondered how many times she'd looked at it before deciding to return it. How many months it took her to see through the man she'd idolized. Maybe it was the unpaid bills, the empty promises, the calls that went unanswered. Or maybe it was something smaller. A quiet moment when she finally noticed who hadn't left. I walked to the small dresser in the corner of the room. The drawer stuck halfway open, swollen from humidity. Inside were my own ghosts, old rent receipts, pay stubs, the evidence of all the years I'd kept that family afloat. I placed the photograph on top of the pile, closed the drawer gently, and sat down. It didn't feel like victory. There was no triumph in that moment. Only a strange stillness, like the sound that follows the end of a storm. Forgiveness doesn't arrive with fanfare. It comes like this, quietly, after the damage has already been counted. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of her standing in the doorway replayed again and again. I thought about what it meant to be needed only after the fact, how love often recognizes its shape only by tracing the outline of its absence. I'd spent years believing that respect could be earned through consistency, through sacrifice, through presence. But maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe respect only grows when loss teaches it the cost of neglect. The next morning I went to work early. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. The city still half asleep. I stopped for coffee at the same shop where I used to take Haley when she was younger, when she still called me by name without bitterness. The barista didn't recognize me, but the smell of roasted beans and warm pastries hit like a memory. For a moment, I imagined her there again, arguing over which muffin was best, rolling her eyes when I chose the wrong one. I smiled without meaning to. I carried the coffee to a bench outside and sat watching the traffic begin to move. People rushing, horns echoing, lives colliding and drifting apart. Somewhere out there, Haley was walking to class, maybe running late, maybe clutching that same bag she used to toss on the kitchen floor. And somewhere, Dean was probably still making promises he couldn't keep. Some people never learn. Others learn too late. By noon, Laura called. I didn't expect it. Her voice was softer than I remembered, steadier. She came to see you, didn't she? She did. A pause. Did she say anything? I hesitated. She said she knew who was really there. Laura exhaled, shaky but relieved. She's been different lately, quieter, more grounded. She's growing up. Yes, Laura said. And I think she finally understands what you were trying to do. I didn't answer. Some truths don't need agreement. After a moment, she added, you could come by sometime. She'd want that. I looked around the room, the bare walls, the unmade bed, the half-empty mug beside the sink. The place had become more than a room. It was a boundary. Maybe, I said. Not yet. Laura didn't push. I'll tell her you got the message. Do that. Then she said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. You were the only one who never asked her to choose. That's why she came back. When the line went dead, I sat in silence for a long time. The afternoon light stretched across the floor, soft and uneven. For years I'd believed that love was something you could build through sheer effort, like a house held up by nails and willpower. But love isn't structure. It's recognition, knowing who stands with you when everything else collapses. I thought about Haley's handwriting, the uneven letters, the smudge where she must have pressed too hard. There was no undoing what had been said that night, no rewriting the years that followed. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe some apologies aren't meant to heal. They're meant to acknowledge the wound exists. That evening, I walked by the river, the air heavy with the scent of rain. The city lights shimmered on the water like broken glass. I stood there watching them shift, thinking about how people return not when they need forgiveness, but when they finally understand what they lost. And understanding, I've learned, is its own kind of punishment. When I came home, the drawer was still slightly open. I pulled it out again, looked at the photograph one last time, then tucked it deeper beneath the papers. Not to hide it, but to keep it safe. It wasn't a reminder of pain anymore. It was proof that lessons, however late, still arrive. Before turning out the light, I sat at the edge of the bed and whispered something into the dark. Not for her, not for Laura, but for myself. You did what you could. It wasn't comfort. It was closure. And somewhere, maybe in a dorm room or a bookstore or the quiet stretch between, a young woman was learning that real love doesn't announce itself. It waits. It endures. It pays the bills when no one thanks it, stands in the doorway when everyone else has left, and remains even when it's been called a mistake. That kind of love doesn't die. It just changes address. So tell me, was I wrong to walk away before they understood what I'd given? Or was that the only way for them to see it at all?